Hello troops, Spectre N7 here. Welcome to the UK edition of Nerf Around the World. This is a collaboration between myself, Alpha, and Dr. Flux. We're trying to all answer the same set of questions to give our viewers and the hobby as a whole a general sense of how different areas of the world interact with the hobby. The links to their videos will be in the description below. And if you have opinions on the hobby, if you're from a different area of the world and you'd like to be included in this collaboration, please don't hesitate to get in contact with one of us. Now, we're all answering the same set of questions, so I'm going to be looking down at my list of questions here and trying to answer them one by one. So the first question, what type of darts and size of darts are the most common? I would say in the UK that by far the most common dart type is the full-length AccuFake. A lot of games in the UK provide a dart pool, and they are the cheapest way for an organizer to provide a high level of engagement and a decent size of dart pool, simply because you can get them for the thousands on the various Oriental sites. The prevalence of half darts is kind of increasing in the UK, particularly for the higher FPS game types. We have been seeing a fair number of sort of half dart shifts with the prevalence of both Talon magazines and regularly accessible off-the-shelf short darts rather than having to make your own. But still, by far the most common is the full-length AccuFake. Question 2. What type of blaster? Springer, flywheels, stringers, HPA. The vast majority of blasters that I see in the UK are either Nerf or other retail grade blasters that have been upgraded. So that's flywheels and springers. There is a burgeoning HPA community happening, mostly off the back of work done by Foam Alliance UK down in Bristol. They're doing a lot of work to provide the community with safe, reliable and tested options for HPA. So we are seeing a slow sort of increase in that use. But the vast majority of games are still of an FPS level where that's not really necessary. It's a lot of work and investment to get into HPA, and really it's not necessary for the vast majority of UK games. Question 3. Mods or no mods? Very much depends on the player. We have a lot of games in the UK with limits that support modded blasters. We also have games in the UK where stock blasters are absolutely the norm. There's really no sort of differentiation one way or the other, no preference one way or the other. Some people really like modifying blasters, some people just like painting theirs, some people just like running around with stock blasters. There's really no sort of judgment one way or the other. The Brute Nerf community is very much about the you nerf you aspect to the hobby. Question 4, homemades or kits? I would say the vast majority of blasters that I encounter are kits, and I would include in that things like 3D printed blasters like the Caliburn and things like that, where you're building a blaster from parts. The old school NIC homemade is something I don't think I've ever seen in the UK hobby. If we consider the Caliburn and other similar platforms like the Lynx or the Bulwark, which have been designed and built by UK designers, I suppose that could theoretically be considered a homemade. But if you take homemade to mean the NIC grade sort of rainbow pistol type things, vanishingly rare in the UK. Question 5. Do different ammo types do different things? I.e., do mega tag shields, do missiles destroy shields? Again, very much dependent on organizers. The general consensus is megas pierce shields and rockets destroy them, but That's not always the case. Sometimes, you know, shields are not allowed in games. Sometimes they are. And again, that depends very much on the organizer. Different organizers have different rules. There's no single guiding principle for different dart types doing different things. Pretty much everything that you fire that is flinging foam at a target tags the other person, and that's about the only consistent thing you could say. Question 5, field types and size of field. So again, there are lots of different places in the UK where you can nerf. Things like Foam.Thunder, which run games in shopping malls and skate parks and a whole bunch of different indoor arenas, down to the guys in Bristol Blast and Grim Up Nerf, who use churches and church halls to run events. And then you have things like Foam Flaming Skirmish and Impact Northwest, which use paintball sites or high level for high level FPS games where you are operating on private land. So again, the field types and size of field vary depending on what you're looking for. One of the great things about the BritNerf community is there's games happening all the time, all over the country, and if you're willing to sort of make a little bit of effort to travel, you can find a game type that suits whatever you want to play. Question 7, any special game modes? So there's a lot of different game modes in the UK. There's a number of sort of common ones that I see played in a lot of different places, because the BritNerf game organisers, they all sort of talk, and they talk to each other about what games work and what games don't work, and you know, through multiple play tests and things like that. One of the sort of most common ones I see, which I'm probably just going to get its name changed, is called Lockdown, which is basically like freeze tag but with Nerf blasters. Basically, you split your teams into two. If you tag somebody with a Nerf dart, they have to freeze in place, and they get brought back in by either being touched on the shoulder or high-fived by a fellow teammate. And the objective basically is to tag all of one team before, and before they can tag you. And the first team to tag everybody else and get them all frozen is the winner. Another common one is called Flux, where you basically have a number of discs which are one color on one side and a different color on another, traditionally red and yellow. You put an odd number of those around your game area, roughly equally spaced, and you have a random timer assigned by the ref, and the objective is to turn all the flux points to your color. And again, the team that has the most flux points at the end wins. It's a bit like domination from Call of Duty. I'm just trying to think of sort of specific game modes that I've played that I've really enjoyed. There's one that we play at FDTI Combat that I'm a big fan of, which is called Bomb Run. And basically you have a tennis ball size thing, which glows. Like you bounce it off the walls or the floor and it starts flashing. And again, split your teams roughly evenly. The bomb starts in the middle, the ball starts in the middle, and each team has a base separate from their spawn point where you have to get that glowing orb to that space. And the orb has to always be flashing. So you can't hide it on your way, you can't stash it in your gear, you've always got to be carrying it, and it's always got to be flashing so that people can always tell where you are with it, which is great fun. There's a few examples of that, and both of Flux, of Lockdown, of Bomb Run on my channel. You can check out the videos for those. But those are the sort of three sort of special game modes that I've really enjoyed. They're the sort of regular ones. But as I say, there's all kinds of different games and all kinds of different game modes that happen pretty much across the UK. Again, check out the rest of the videos on my channel for examples of gameplay. There's a lot of cool stuff happening out there, and hopefully when the plague has finished, we'll be able to get back to it. Question 8. Common FPS limits. Now, the Brit-Nerf community operates a category system to sort of define FPS limits. Categories A through E, and that basically allows you to determine what the FPS limits are, where you're likely to see them get used, and things like that. So I'm going to go over each of those. First of all, you've got category A games. They have a sort of standard public grounds that this would be your bone stock style game. So limits would be 75 FPS for darts, 50 FPS for mega, and 100 FPS for rival. Now, a category A game is relatively uncommon now in the UK, but it is still on our list because it's the sort of bottom level. The vast majority of games that I play are category B or C. Category B is, again, public events. The energy cap is 0.6 joule and has a 100 FPS dart limit, 75 FPS for mega, and 100 FPS again for rival. Now, this is the sort of standard game that I play at Foam Dart Thunder with a 100 FPS limit, and that's the game I play most often. That's why I have the Nope cannon here, which is set up to do just shy of 100 FPS. It doesn't need to do more than that, but it's a lot of fun to play with. You then have category C events, which is 130. This is the sort of similar to the US HVZ, and this is the highest FPS you can do in the UK whilst still being in a public area. Anything higher than that, you need to be on private land, something like an airsoft site or a paintball site. You then have category D, which is 200 FPS semi-auto and 100 FPS full auto. And then you've got category E, which is 300 FPS for darts and 230 FPS for mega and rival. And that's the sort of very top end of the UK games. I've not played any game in my time in the hobby that's had a limit higher than 300 FPS. Most of the games that I've played have been in the 100 and 130 range, with a couple of exceptions. Question 9. Are there any legal issues with public play? Are you restricted to where you can play? So there are, this comes back to the category limits that we've just kind of touched on. If you are using a blaster in the UK that is over 130 feet per second in a public place, there's some potential legal issues there. I'm not going to go into them. I'm not a lawyer, but generally for insurance and legal reasons, if you're playing in a public space, you don't want a blaster that shoots over 130. If you want to have a war with a higher FPS limit than that, you need to be looking at the very least public liability insurance and a site that is insured to cover that. So paintball or airsoft sites are our sort of common go-to areas for that. Question 10. Do we use shields, and if so, what's the mechanics? We kind of covered that back in question 5. Shields are a thing in some games, and the sort of standard Brit Nerf, and I use that very loosely because it's kind of the game organizers of the Brit Nerf community in general, they all get together when they talk about this kind of stuff. The standard rule expected for shields is that megas pierce and rockets destroy for a round, but that varies depending on game and game organizer. So if you are attending a game in the UK, always make sure that you touch base with your game organizer to check whether or not you can use a shield, if you can use a shield, and how that interacts with your game. Question 11 just says melee. Melee is really, really rare in the UK. I think the only game I've ever played at that allowed melee as an option was at the Kiln, which allowed Nerf brand specific, as in if it was like a zombie strike machete or a marauder sword, something that was a Nerf brand foam weapon, that was an acceptable melee weapon at Kiln, and they're the only place I've ever played at in the UK that allowed melee. And our last question, what is the culture like? This is a bit of a sort of tricky question for me to answer. Obviously, my experience of the Brit Nerf hobby may not be that of everybody else's. I have generally found the Brit Nerf culture to be one of very friendly, very tolerant, very sort of engaging with hobbyists, ranging from, you know, sort of kids as young as 6 right the way up to, you know, people as old as 60. The Nerf hobby in the UK is, you know, tries very hard to be as open to people as possible, to try and make sure that everybody can get involved in flinging foam and doing so in a safe, enjoyable, and, you know, friendly manner. You know, we have regular sort of meetups and so forth, things like the Battle of Brit Nerf, where we get people coming from all over the country to one place to fling foam at each other and be social and enjoy each other's company. There's a whole sort of sense of community, because the Nerf hobby in the UK is still, if there's 1,000 people actively involved in it, I'd be impressed. I mean, it's still, in the grand scheme of things, a reasonably small niche hobby, and it's but the people that are in it are some of the nicest people I've met. It's very difficult for me to kind of talk about the sort of culture here, because obviously that's always going to be coloured through my eyes and my interactions with people, but everybody I've met's been super friendly and super into getting people involved, and, you know, encouraging me to get into modding, into painting, into hydro dipping, into, you know, doing YouTube stuff, into attending things like Foam Fest. I mean, I have a banner. I've moved so far forward in this hobby in ways that I never thought were possible. I mean, I've traveled the world to be part of it, and I love being part of it, and a lot of that is fueled by Brit Nerf and its community. So, you know, if you're interested, you know, all I can say is, if you have ever thought, you know what, that sounds like a thing I'd like to try, you know, look us up, check out the Brit Nerf Facebook page, check out the Brit Nerf forums and the various websites and the various game organizers in your area. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or, you know, if you want help getting in touch with people in the Brit Nerf community in your area, then, you know, my inbox is open. Please feel free to get in touch. I will be more than happy to try and get you in touch with the person who's closest to you, who's running your sort of local area game, so that we can get you flinging foam with the rest of us. Thank you very much for listening. I'm SpectreN7. This has been Nerf Around the Globe, and I should go.